In the conference, eyes were also set on domestic politics and the 2025 presidential race. If Gbagbo has not officially announced his bid for the executive secretary, it's an obvious fact. According to Damanan PK's member of the PPAC, President Laurent Gbagbo is their natural candidate for the 2025 elections.
Concerning the 2025 elections, President Laurent Gbagbo is a natural candidate.
President Alassane Ouattara has led the country since 2010. In addition to Gbagbo's party, other Ivorian opposition parties include the PDCE by former leader Henri Konan Bédié and the NJIX by the former First Lady Simone Gbagbo.
Thank you so much, Justine Fort. So just to reiterate, we have gotten indications that the second guest of today, Mr. FIDELIS FONGWA, is with us, just to say that he is a PhD researcher as well as a collaborator with the Proximity Law Chamber. Good day to you, sir. Mr. FIDELIS FONGWA, good afternoon. Okay, we shall be proceeding. Just time. We have our first question of the day. This question is directed to you, Dr. ASONG Michael KHUMBAH. Of course, the question I'd like to ask you this afternoon is, what is your view of the former President Laurent Gbagbo's decision to go in for the 2025 presidential elections in the West African country?
For me, this is what I think. I think that for Gbagbo to go in for another presidential election is really stupid on his part. And even though this is a constitutional right, which is being attributed to every citizen, Ivorian citizen, nevertheless, I think with everything that had happened in Ivory Coast, it would not be a good idea for him to take part in elections. As a matter of fact, it is worth mentioning that according to the Ivorian constitution of the year 2000, which was later on amended in 2016, in that constitution of 2000, it was being mentioned that the term of office had to go for 5 years and a president could only be re-eligible once. And more to that, you could not take part in presidential elections if you were above 75 years old. But nevertheless, in 2016, when the constitution was amended through a referendum organized by President Ouattara, this particular condition, which was being stipulated in the constitution of 2000, was being cancelled. And it gave them the opportunity for any Ivorian who is above 35 years old to run for presidential elections. Notwithstanding, Gbagbo, when he came back from his trial at the ICC, he met Ouattara, and they tried to have some sort of peace talk. But a few days ago, in an interview, Gbagbo gave us the impression that it was not a peace talk, and that Ouattara and himself, they had to set new goals for the Ivorians. Notwithstanding, Gbagbo was being sentenced in 2018 for an imprisonment of 20 years for having stolen funds from the Abidjan Central Bank. So this is an allegation which he has always refused, but the sentence is still in application. And more to that, we realize that Gbagbo, even though he thinks that he has a lot of support, that might not be the case, because we all know that 40 years ago, Gbagbo created the Ivorian Popular Front, which was the party with which he won elections, and he became president of Ivory Coast and ruled from 2000 to 2000. He did not win the elections, but through the party he became president from 2000 to 2021. 2011. And in 2011, we had the political unrest that actually led to his indictment and prosecution before the ICC. Now, Gbagbo is talking about coming back to the political scene. And what is strange is that he has created a new party. So he is not even going back to lead the party which he created and which had been existing for over 40 years, which is the Ivorian Popular Party, but he has created a new party called the African People's Party, with which he's going to use to present his candidature at the presidential elections of 2025. When we look at all this ambiguity surrounding the personality of Gbagbo and all the different activities which he has to put forth, we realize that they are very unstable. And he has a lot of things at hand which can be used against him. And I think that for him to come back to the political scene with all what has happened is just another provocation for instability in Ivory Coast. Ivory Coast now today is one of those countries that has known a lot of political conflicts, civil wars, due to political conflicts. And we don't want such things to happen again, considering the fact that in West Africa there is a lot of instability, a lot of civil wars. And if there is another civil war in Ivory Coast, it's going to make things worse. So for me, I strongly believe that Gbagbo, as a mature person, even though this is a constitutional right which is attributed to every Ivorian to actually stand for the presidential elections, I think that ethically, morally, Gbagbo was supposed to step down, forget about this, move on, and encourage the young Ivorians to look for a new leader. When the Secretary General or one of the militants of this African People's Party stands up and says that Gbagbo is a natural candidate, it's a real problem, because we have this going all around Africa, where people believe that only a certain category of people can rule a nation. Everyone has that capacity, everyone has that possibility. Every citizen who is of mature age can rule a country very well if he decides to take upon his civic responsibilities and actually put in place good systems to govern. Governance is not for one person. Everybody can be a good leader, everybody can govern. So this thing of talking about natural candidates, it's another way for us to go back to the same problems we have been having in Africa. And these are the issues which have brought back conflicts, which have brought a lot of pains and suffering in African countries. And we have to know that the main issue that we are having in African nations is that there is no change. There is no change of power. We keep on seeing the same and the same people on the political scene, and that creates some sort of dependence, that creates some sort of weariness and tiredness, and people are not willing to have such. So those who come over and over to bring the same people to the scene, automatically they are just looking for another means that conflict should reign in our African countries and that there should be political instability.
We shall be coming back to the aspect of political instability with regards to this recent announcement of his candidacy for the 2025 presidential elections. But then you earlier mentioned on the aspect of his legal history. Now, is that not something that restrains or restricts a leader or past leader with a legal history from running for the presidency?
Actually, as a matter of fact, regarding most constitutions, you can't present yourself as a presidential candidate when you have been actually being sentenced for a term of imprisonment. But in this situation, as I earlier on said, Gbagbo has been sentenced to 20 years of imprisonment for having stolen from the Abidjan Central Bank. So he has never accepted this. And it was being mentioned that President Ouattara had pardoned him and some other members who followed him in his party and who actually caused the political unrest in 2011. But the issue here is that presidential pardon is not something which is verbal. Presidential pardon has to be written because administration is written. So this actually raises another issue because, as a matter of fact, this sentence is still in application, and at any time it can be executed. Not only executed in the sense that it can prevent him for standing in for presidency, but it can also lead to his imprisonment in Ivory Coast. But when we look at the scenario, we know that if the government has to take this move, the judiciary organ has to take this move to apply this sentence, then automatically it will cause another political unrest. So that is why I say that Gbagbo is not doing something really good, and as a matter of fact, it will actually cause more issues. So based on this, he is not even supposed to take part in these elections, and moreover, from a moral and ethical point of view, even considering that the Constitution of 2000, which was being put forth by Gbagbo himself when he took power, actually prohibited any Ivorian above 75 years old to take part in elections. So today, Gbagbo is 77 years old, and as a matter of fact, he, as somebody reasonable, as somebody who wants political stability in Africa, is supposed to step down and give way for other people and not actually take part in these elections.
That now the question I'd like to ask you is earlier on there was the presidential pardon that evoked or brought about a lot of controversy there in the West African country, and we had a lot of political analysts that gave different views regarding that presidential pardon. But now I'd like to find out this presidential pardon towards Laurent Gbagbo, who was a former president of the West African country. Could we say that it was given by the current president Alassane Ouattara as a political strategy?
Well, of course, I think that was the main reason behind, because for peace and stability to reign in Ivory Coast, considering the fact that Gbagbo was being liberated from the ICC, Ouattara had to use every means in his possession to be able to bring peace in Ivory Coast. And to do that, he had to start by making peace with his political opponents, and in this case, especially Laurent Gbagbo, with whom we had a serious conflict, which actually led to his indictment and prosecution at the ICC. So after 10 years, it was very important for Ouattara to seek peace, because nevertheless, Gbagbo still has a lot of supporters in Ivory Coast, and so many people stand behind him, considering the fact that Gbagbo was a pro-nationalist, and Ouattara is more with the colonial master France. So we see the wind of change in Africa today, and how Africans are turning more to nationalist leaders than leaders who have a lot of links with our former colonial master France. So in this case, Ouattara was forced to set a foundation of peace in the society in Ivory Coast, and to do that, he had to shake hands with Gbagbo and also issue this presidential pardon, so that peace should reign in Gbagbo and that there should be some sort of reconciliation. So that was Ouattara's main goal. But from the different points which interviews which Gbagbo had a few days ago, we have the impression that Ouattara was striving for reconciliation, but in Gbagbo's mind, that has not been the case. Gbagbo still feels that he was being cheated, still feels that there was some sort of injustice that was being perpetrated on his regard. He still feels that he still has a place in the political sphere of Ivory Coast, and that he can still take back power, or with Ouattara they could set new goals for leadership in Ivory Coast. So it becomes very, very complicated in this case, because when you set a platform for reconciliation, the parties are supposed to give their consent and agreements based on certain events and facts, which each and everyone wants to be implemented. But when we realize that the parties at one point have disagreements, and we realize that they don't any longer say the same things, then at that moment we have to start asking so many questions, because we can still lead to another situation of impasse between the two.
Okay, we're getting indications that Mr. Fidelis is with us. So, sir, good afternoon to you.
Madam Sharon, good afternoon. I'm happy to join you in today's program.
Okay, it's
sorry,
a pleasure.
Sorry for my late comment.
No, it's okay. It's a pleasure to finally have you on board. So, as you have equally heard your co-panelists speak, I'd like to also get your own view regarding this recent announcement of Laurent Gbagbo to go in for the 2025 presidential elections.
Coming from somebody like Laurent Gbagbo, I think it should not be something more strange to us. He's somebody that has been at the helm of political activities in this country for long.
Yes.
And as such, I'm mindful of the fact that we are in Africa, and when a leader has attended that particular echelon, he never just like to leave power. But it's very disgraceful in the sense that somebody like him was supposed to be setting pace for others to follow. Coming to power in 2000 and the year 2000 was because of the popular support of his supporters, which of course he betrayed. He betrayed that particular support in 2011, which of course led to the death of about 3,000 people in Côte d'Ivoire. And he was now arrested and taken to The Hague for legal proceedings and was acquitted. Just coming back for reconciliation, we think issues like that must have gone down a natural death. But hearing him declaring his intention to run again for the 2025 election is more like disgraceful. It does not befit somebody of his status. And I think Africans need to sit up and kick out some of these our leaders who believe that the only way to serve their country is to be at the helm of the political happening. There are other ways through which he can help in rebuilding Côte d'Ivoire, rather than being a president. Forming a new party to go after the same person that have granted you pardon, and then after all this
Are you with us, Mr.
Like
Fidelis?
I said,
Okay, right on.
Wish politics is a nice something. Yeah, I'm getting you.
Okay, yeah, right on, sir.
Am I connected?
Yes, you are.
Right. Yeah, because one thing we need to kick out from our mentality is that the best way to serve a country must not be at the helm. You must not be at the helm of political happening in your country. He has done his best. He has witnessed some challenges. I think it was wise for him to sit back, do a self-evaluation, and encourage some young people to also take part in the political activities in the country. Mindful of the fact that his reign has been so challenging, more than 3,000 has gone down, and he just was just charged and acquitted from the ICC, coming back for reconciliation, and in declaring his intention to run for the 2025 election is more like a sham and the highest level of greed from any African leader, and Africans need to sit up. Côte d'Ivoire need vibrant young people to take part in the political happenings. He has done his best, and I think it is not wise enough for him to drag everything he has ever worked up as a legacy to the mob.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fidelis. The next question I'd like to ask you is, how do you think this move made by the former President Laurent Gbagbo will impact the politics of Ivory Coast as well as the political trajectory of the African continent?
it is but obvious to say that it is negative on his part. He might have, or he might think he has supporters, like any other political leader, but I think that it is not something to be admired. And of course, it is something very, very common in Africa. We think that the best way is to stay and violate our constitution. Just, I think, in 2016, 2017, they started making moves, which of course saw the birth of the extension of the term of office of Mr. President in Cote d'Ivoire, which of course put to doubt the strength of that particular constitution by another leader, the present leader, in a bid to stay in power. For him coming back to politics at the age of 77 is really does not well, and Africans need to sit up. We know that one of the irony about dictatorship, let me just take to that, is that dictatorship from its very substratum is not really a bad system, but our leaders, when given the privilege, they usually abuse it, they stay there forever and they do nothing. But now Africans have discovered that change is inevitable. And I think that leaders also have to accept the will of their citizens and believe that what they can do, there are some other people that can even do more better when building a nation. His utterances and his declaration to run for presidency 2025 is, of course, very, very common in Africa, and that is the image that some of young Africans today who are now diving into politics are trying to wipe out. It's a negative image, and we must try to kick against it if we need, and if we love Africa, and if we wish to build Africa to be what we want. It should not happen. The people of Cote d'Ivoire need to sit up and say no to such move. He must not be president. He must not be president. He has done his best, and I think that he should sit back and then admire and also try to bring up young politicians rather than forming another political party, which even if he wins or even if he loses, he will still have to go out and cause more life through rioting and challenging election. He has proven that he is incompetent based on the fact that he did not want to accept defeat in 2011, and that is a good enough grounds for the people of Cote d'Ivoire not to give him the second chance to violate their constitution with impunity.
We shall be coming back to you, Mr. Fidelis. I would like to channel this question to you, Dr. ASONG. You equally mentioned earlier political stability in the West African country. How can this decision impact the political stability of Ivory Coast?
Well, as a matter of fact, as we have earlier been saying, and also what my co-panelists have said, we realize that political instability in Africa is most of the time due to the violation of the rule of law. So when the rule of law is being violated, then we are then exposed to problems of political conflicts. And we know how political conflicts turn out to be. We have a lot of debts, we have businesses which are crushed, economic crisis, social, and all these things actually have an impact in the whole political setting of the country. So these things lead to political instability, and when there is political instability, it's like an infection which spreads. And considering the fact that in West African states today, we already have about 3 or 4 West African countries that have gone through civil wars. Having Ivory Coast to add again to this will be a clear sign that we have serious issues concerning governance, we have serious issues concerning peace and durable political settings in our West African states. And we are not supposed to let this happen, because if this happens, then it brings more instability in the region. And when there is more instability in the region, we have more rebel groups that will sprout up, more groups that will take advantage of the situation to render things worse. So in this case scenario, we are not supposed to give hand to any instability that might happen in future in any West African state, and by the way, in any African state, because that will only lead to more difficulties and more sufferings in our different African states. So that's the reason why the issue of Gbagbo actually presenting himself once more for election is something which might likely cause another political instability. We have to know that Gbagbo too might be acting in that manner because President Ouattara also violated the constitution in 2016, because according to the constitution of 2016, is Article 55, it is clearly stated that he can only represent or re-eligible for one more term, and he is now into his third term. So he blatantly violated the constitution. And as I earlier said, one of the issues we are having in Africa is that our leaders don't want to respect the rule of law. They don't want to respect the constitution. So when the leader does not lead by example, automatically the other citizens feel that they can take the laws also into their hands. And that is why you see Gbagbo is also reacting in the same way, that if he can violate the constitution, then why can I not also violate the constitution or the rule of law, or violate moral and ethical aspects of life? So at the end of the day, we have some sort of turmoil, and we always boil down to the same thing. And it is for that reason why preventing Gbagbo, or actually helping him to understand that assisting in these elections is another means to generate a new political crisis in Ivory Coast, is very important. And I think that that is the role that the West African bloc, regional bloc, has to play in actually bringing Gbagbo back to his senses, and actually encourage young leaders to come to the political scene. That is more promising, and that will be a better move to actually bring in sustainable political stability in Ivory Coast and also in the West African regions.
Thank you so much, Dr. ASONG. Just to proceed with you, Mr. Fidelis, you earlier mentioned the aspect of leaders ruling for so long, and now Laurent Gbagbo, who is the former president of Ivory Coast, according to a political figure there in the West African country, states that he is a natural leader. Now, do you think that other African leaders go in for more than 2 terms or exceed even to 3 terms because they feel they are natural leaders in their respective countries?
Yeah, that is one of the mentality that they have grown to believe. I don't see where the concept of natural leader is even coming in this 21st century. I don't see how a normal human being who believes that he is natural to carry on particular leadership activities, whereas there are people who also can be given the responsibility, the task to do more better. And the issue of natural leadership with him saying or feeling that he is natural, I don't even see him in a square hole. Because taking from example, taking from his leadership since the year 2000, which has always been in political upheaval, a lot of tribalism, his people, some of them were very much against him. And that was a true test that was put before him to prove this particular ideology of natural leaderness, which we still doubt where it is coming from our African leaders. But again, coming back after this scandal, the scandalous activities, like a president which was humiliated from a bungalow with the wife and taken to the International Court of Justice, International Criminal Court of Justice, to come back and start laying or making allusions or making believe the fact that he can still stand for the 2025 election, still put his integrity to question. We are talking about the life of 3,000 people from Cote d'Ivoire that has been put that have been killed because of his bad governance, because he did not want to accept defeat, because he believed that he is a natural leader, because he has abused the power with impunity, because there is no rule of law. And coming back again to form an alliance or a new party with the belief that he can continue from where he stopped, he should at least have pity on the people and give room for young people also to help in rebuilding their shattered economy like any other African country. Our leaders need to wave out this ideology of natural leadership. There is nobody that is natural in leadership. There is nobody. We should know that leadership is a chain of ideas that come, people pull them together to contribute for the betterment of humanity, for the betterment of a particular system, for the betterment of a particular society. African leaders should make sure and try to project the African dignity to the upper level, making ourselves look like people who have learned nothing and have forgotten nothing. When it comes to politics, we think only about our stomach, we think only about our interests. The common man we care less about. That is just what he's doing. And I think that that slogan of natural leadership is really a slap. It's really a slap to his people on the face and a clear challenge to the constitution of Ivory Coast. And if he thinks that he has dignity, he has pride, and he wants that his legacy should live on, if there is any, I think he should embrace change by leaving leadership for the people or for young people to also come in and contribute. It is not a one party something, it is not something that must be done by him. After all, what did he do? He did nothing rather than causing the life of 3,000 plus citizens to perish because of greed for power.
Okay, we shall be. Okay,
we Afghan is not. It is something very common in Africa, so we need to kick it out. Yes.
Thank you so much. We shall be coming back to you. I would like to channel this question to you, Dr. ASONG. Time and again, we have brought forth this issue of governance on the African continent, and now we are still seeing this aspect of governance in Ivory Coast. Now, how can this mode of governance, not just in the African continent, but we're looking at Ivory Coast as a specific country as we speak, how can this mode of governance be reshaped?
Well, that's a quite difficult question. But the first thing, as we all know, governance has to do with organizing a state, and this with regards to set rules and laws, and actually through the constitution, which is the main law of the land. The issue we have is that with our egoistic African mentalities, which most of our African leaders put forward, we don't respect the rule of law, which is one of the main dimensions of governance. It becomes very, very complicated because when it concerns the respect for the rule of law, it has to actually deal with a change of mindset. I strongly believe that we have to change our African mentalities to know that the most important thing is the respect of the rule of law. And when the rule of law is not respected, then automatically we are being prone to have a lot of conflicts, whether be it from our side or be it from the opposition. So how can we tackle the issue of violating the rule of law? So I think that for me, the first thing, it has to go through a change of mindset. So we need a comprehensive approach to all matters, and especially matters related to governance. Africans will have to grow up. Africans will have to change their mentalities to know that power is not meant for a particular group of people. Power is meant for everybody. Power is for the population. And actually, that power and sovereignty actually belongs to the people, but it is just being exercised by the leaders. So it means that the leaders should not see themselves as the only people that can rule and govern, but that they should know that actually changing hand and passing over power is one of the main things that will actually lead to development. Let's look at the world today. One of the most developed countries, or the most developed countries in the world, are countries that actually respect democracy. So when we look at the US, when we look at France, we look at England, we look at Germany, we look at most of these European countries, it's because of democracy. That is why they are doing so well. Nevertheless, it's true that other countries like China and Russia are also doing well, but they are not doing well as America. By the way, China is even doing well because they copy and pasted from America and the European countries. It's just to say that there's always something good in democracy. And having to change power, rotation of power, is very, very vital to the development of a country. So we have to really change our mindsets. We have to learn from other countries and see the benefits of changing power in other countries and respect them. When we look at most of our African countries today that respect the principles of democracy and that have leaders who actually that have had so many leaders and change of power, we realize that they are more developed than those countries where they are authoritative regimes. Look at Nigeria, the first economic power of Africa. Look at Ghana, look at Kenya, look at Tanzania. These countries, they are examples. Look at Botswana. Nobody talks about Botswana, but Botswana is the most prominent example in Africa. So we have to change our mindsets, and our leaders will have to come down to realize that they have to change their mindsets and actually encourage a system where there will be rotation of power. Mandates should not go more than two terms. And when you're done with that, you should not even be able to be re-elected again or eligible for elections. So that's the way we can go through it. The African Union will have a great role to play to actually carry on programs and projects and plans which are going to sensitize the African population, bring in the advantages of rotation of power, and encourage the youths to change their mentalities and not to follow the mentalities of those who preceded them.
Thank you so much. Now we have seen the West African community of Central African states, or West African states, the economic community of West African states, ECOWAS, so to say. It has been sanctioning countries that did not respect presidential terms, that did not respect law and other aspects in their various countries. Now in the West African region, now we're looking at ECOWAS. What role does ECOWAS have to play when it comes to addressing issues like this in Ivory Coast and other African countries? Now this question is directed to you, Mr. Fidelis.
ECOWAS is a regional bloc that was created to promote the economic development of Africa with members. And if they must do that, they must first of all talk, like the learned doctor said, they first of all have to drill Africans on leadership, because it's through a good leader that development is visible. And I think they should also inculcate this in their many programs to educate our leaders who fall prey in thinking that they can rule for life, they can violate the same laws that brought them in to power with impunity in order to stay there for long. And this can only be achieved through sanctions. Sanctions that are very visible, sanctions that can even make a leader to stand the chance never to partake in any leadership activity, not only in his country, but in Africa as a whole, or as a member state to ECOWAS. So I think that we have all these things, we have all the rules, we have all the mechanism, we have everything, but like Doctor said, we need to reshape our mindset about leadership. We need to rethink, we need to make people to see the advantages of the rotation of the presidency. Without which, it's not only about the presidency, there are other organs in administration that also need to visit to be visited with change. But we talk about the at the hem of the presidency because it is the most pronounced, and of course, and it's a privilege for somebody to even have the opportunity to hem that particular leadership. So, as a regional bloc, they can reshape their laws, and that will make African leaders who think that being in power or being natural or being given the opportunity to lead is something that must only be enjoyed by them. It is something that must always go around, and when it goes around, the idea of African development, African unity, and progress, democracy, which are very buried in their principles, will of course flourish, and Africa will be a better place for investment, for living, and for political stability. Without which, I think that
right on, Mr. Fidelis.
Has taken a very gigantic direction. Without which, I think Laurent Gbagbo has taken a giant step towards the negative direction by thinking that he can still be a president or natural president whatsoever, to the disadvantage of the development and stability of his country, which of course stand a chance to be copied by other leaders, because we are very good in Africa to copy negative things. That is one thing about leadership. We are very good in copying negative things, and until these regional blocs sit up and stamp these ill practices out, that is the only way through development, through democracy can be embraced by Africa.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Fidelis. I'll be coming back to you for your closing remark. The question I'd like to ask you, Dr. ASONG, is, having listened to what Mr. Fidelis said regarding leadership, governance, as you earlier mentioned, in a few words, what message could you give out to African leaders?
Well, it's worth mentioning that I agree with him in everything that he said, and that is what we actually need to move on. My message to all African presidents is that they have to think about the future generation, because most of them rule or lead as if we are living in the now. But we need sustainable development for our countries. And to be able to achieve that, we must think of the future. We must think of the political durability of our nations in future, economic, health, and education. So our leaders have to be reminded that they have an obligation to preserve the integrity of the state for it to be as durable as it can be. And that will only go through putting in place mechanisms that would encourage young leaders to stand up, to grow up, and to be able to be competent and qualified to rule in future. And they cannot achieve this by staying for long in power, because by staying for long in power, they are setting the wrong example and they are setting the wrong foundations for the future generations. They have to make everyone understand that power is not meant for a particular category of people, but it is meant for everybody, and that everybody has the capacity and the right, according to the Constitution, to take part in a presidential election. So leadership has to be encouraged in every way, and youth have to be brought up in a manner that they have to know that they can lead others and lead their countries to prosperity and development, which we all desire.
Now, on to you, Mr. Fidelis. Just a few closing remarks before we draw down the curtains of today's edition.
What more is there to say than to encourage we young Africans to take part in leadership? And we should not look ourselves very inferior, because I don't think that if the youth were educated about the benefit of some of these challenging positions to be taken by them, we will not be here talking about a leader that thinks that he should be natural, he should be there, He is the Alpha and the Omega, and things like that. One thing we must do is to keep encouraging our youth to take part in effective leadership, because the African continent belongs to us. The African continent is what we must preserve for our future generation. Leadership is a very vital role in ensuring this particular progress for the future generation. And through good leadership only can we live a sustainable, a stable, and a prosperous African society for people to willfully come in and invest and enjoy, like in Europe. Like, I think we Africans need to really sit up when it comes to issues of leadership and kick out this mystical idea of who is natural, who is more equal, who is more better to rule. It's a challenging mission, it's a task, and it takes people with courage to do it. Without which leader will come out, gather and tell them, look at me, a natural.
Okay, we are having some network challenges with you, Mr. Fidelis.
Candidate ordained by whosoever he thinks has ordained him to take part in the leadership of his. And all right, so that is all I can say. That African youth, African leadership should be taken very seriously by the future generation and this generation. If we more can.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Fidelis, for taking our time to join us on today's edition of
Place to be.
Okay.
Thank you very much, madam.
You're welcome.
It's a privilege.
Thank you so much. Okay, I say thank you to you equally, Dr. ASONG, for joining us on today's edition of Voice It.
Thank you, and thank you to all our viewers.
Ladies and gentlemen, slowly but surely, we have come to the end of today's edition of Voice It over your Pan-African channel. For you Media Africa, as you know, I'm NJIX Sharon NABESEH on NJIX NABESEH for presentation. Today we were discussing the 2025 presidential elections in Ivory Coast, as the former leader of the West African country did say he was ready to go in for the presidential race. We had two solid panels, two solid guests this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, that will be it for today's edition. Bye-bye. Stay in company of our programs.